What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and on this channel, we subscribe to the idea of don't draft an early round running back without legendary upside. And this was an article written by Pat Kerrane 3 years ago, and to me, it's still one of the best articles in all of fantasy football over the last few years. And the entire idea is, if you're going to draft a running back early, he needs to have legendary league-winning upside, which is what we saw last year, right? We saw a lot of busts in the early rounds for running backs, right? Nick Chubb got hurt. Austin Eckler wasn't good. You had Ramondre Stevenson, who wasn't all that great either, and a bunch of other running backs that sunk your team. But if you drafted Christian McCaffrey, you probably won your league, where he was the #1 overall scorer across running back, wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback with a legendary season, where if you had him on your roster, you were about twice as likely to make your fantasy playoffs than your league mates. So today, we're going to look forward to 2024, and we're going to talk through my 5 must-draft running backs that I believe have that monster 24-plus point per game legendary upside season in their range of outcomes, guys that I'm targeting in all of my drafts. So with all that being said, if you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go.
Like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm frozen. She gon' let me.
Now, this article by Pat Kerrane is 3 years old, and some of the data in it is a little bit outdated, but like I just said, a lot of these same heuristics held true last year in fantasy football, where Christian McCaffrey gave you this massive, massive edge, where he was the leading scorer across all positions. And you can see on the bottom of this screenshot where it's Christian McCaffrey versus Kerrane versus Kamara. McCaffrey just gave you an edge over the rest of the running backs that just you can't even replicate, right? Where the wide receivers like Lamb was great, Tyreek Hill was great, but then you also had Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then you also had Justin Jefferson, who was okay. And it wasn't the same type of value over replacement that you get with a guy like McCaffrey when he just gaps the entire field of running backs. Now, with that being said, we can highlight the downside of taking a running back early, which is bust rates and injuries, where if we look at since 2021, so this is over the last 3 seasons, running backs are about 1.35 times more likely to miss 4 or more games than wide receivers. Missing 4 or more games about 35% of the time. Running backs drafted inside of the top 24 ADP, so RB1 through RB24, 35% of the time, those running backs are missing 4 or more games. So they're getting hurt at a higher rate. And on top of that, wide receiver has closed the gap over the last about 6 years. So since 2018, so that's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 6 years, you have wide receivers scoring 20-plus point per game seasons over that span to 19 running backs. So wide receivers, right? Last year we saw Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek, CeeDee Lamb. They were all smash league-winning type of picks. But when you go to that next level, wide receivers just simply can't compete with running backs there. Where in that 24-plus point per game area, we've had 7 running backs since 2018, only 2 wide receivers. And those wide receivers was Cooper Kupp, where he just had his monster season. And it was like Devontae Adams for like a 14-game stretch, I believe, in 2020 or 2021. So we did have to bump it up. Last year, we did the same video with 22.5-plus points per game, but we just saw Tyreek and CeeDee Lamb hit that. You have to put the bar even higher. So I truly can't stress enough again, if we're taking on the risk of these running backs, we have to shoot for the moon. There is no safe running back picks in your first 3 rounds. These running backs get hurt, they get old, they get injured. It is a lot of the times better to just take a wide receiver or take a safe like quarterback or tight end in round 3. If you're going to take a running back early, you need to have this upside to justify it. So we looked at the running backs since 2010 to hit 24 or more points per game. We have 12 running backs here. You have Saquon, David Johnson, Arian Foster, Le'Veon Bell, Dalvin Cook, Todd Gurley twice, Christian McCaffrey 3 times, Jamal Charles, Alvin Kamara. And I outlined kind of the key elements of these running backs so we can kind of look forward and see what do we need from a running back for them to hit 24 or more points per game. So I found their career year, so that's just a year of their career, right? Are they in year 1, 2, 3? Are they a rookie? Age, their positional ADP, which is something we're going to talk about eventually, probably in the next week or so, where running backs are getting drafted later than ever. Even on like ESPN and Sleeper, your home leagues, running backs are getting drafted later now. So I don't care much about was this guy drafted in round 3. I care, was he drafted RB6? Was he the RB8 off the board, right? Just like RB1 through 12. Then you have weighted opportunities per game, which is just your carries plus your targets, but your targets are weighted higher. So in PPR leagues, we're getting more points for reception, so you want to weight targets are more valuable than carries. Targets per game, another avenue of just we want volume in the passing game. Then you have efficiency. FPOE per game is fantasy points over expected per game. So based on your volume, your expected points, right, just based on your carries, your targets, your red zone looks, how many points should you have? How many points should you be superseding that by? And then I have their previous FPOE per game high, which is before your legendary season, did you flash that high upside before then? Then we have team environment, which is pretty self-explanatory of we want offenses that score points, right? That's offensive points for rank. QB rush attempts per game, we want quarterbacks that aren't vulturing goal line looks or taking away dump-off targets. And then changing teams with Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, and Josh Jacobs. And even if you want to go further than that, like Joe Mixon, a lot of these guys are changing teams this last offseason. I wanted to look at that as well. And what that gave us were the core components of a legendary running back of having 24 or more points per game. And pretty much across the board, what I saw was 100% of them had 18 or more weighted opportunities per game. 100% did not change teams. 91.7% had an RB 1 to 12 ADP, so drafted inside the top 12 running backs. 91% had 5 or more targets per game. 90.9% already had a previous season of 2.5 or better FPOE per game, so they already flashed that elite upside. Year 4 or earlier, age 25 or younger. So we want youth, we want young running backs. 75% were in top 12 scoring offenses, and 75% had less than 5 quarterback rush attempts per game. So what that leads us to do here is we now plug all of those into the 2024 crop of running backs, and you get this. This is a loaded screenshot, I will not lie. But pretty much what I did is we had the criteria. I plugged in Mike Clay's projections for the volume, for the team-based stuff of quarterback rush attempts per game, and we have Vegas scoring projections, where if you look forward at like Vegas over-unders and then you assign team totals, you can figure out what Vegas thinks the highest scoring offenses are going to be. So that's also there with a double asterisk. So we can now see the profile of each player as it pertains to a legendary running back season. And for this, if you hit a category, I put that box as green. If you just barely miss it, so Breece Hall, the Jets scoring offense is projected to be 14th. The cutoff we're looking for is top 12, so I gave some leeway there. So yellow is like you just missed it, green is you hit it, and then across the bottom, I then made scores for each running back, where simple total is simply this, where I took, if you had a green box, that is just 1 point. If you have a yellow box, that's half a point. I'll actually sort of inflate this a little bit. You can see with Breece Hall, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and a half, 8.5, right? So that's pretty simple there. Weighted total is a little bit more out there, so for 100%, it's a way of just weighting them by their percentages. So the first green is 10, then 9.2. It's just pretty much their percentage divided by 10. So 10, 10, 9.2, 9.2, 9.1, 8.3, 8.3, 3.75 plus 7.5 gives you 75.4. And then I put that across the entirety of the top 12 running backs in ADP right now, and then I swapped them around, ranked by their weighted total there. And in terms of overall, before I get into my 5 running back targets, in terms of overall vibes here, this did make me want to move down Jonathan Taylor. He's in a pretty brutal spot where you have Anthony Richardson taking away goal line looks. He doesn't have the receiving upside. It's not great. The scoring offense doesn't look like it's going to be that great either, according to Vegas. To me, the clear fades are the guys changing teams, are older at this point. Saquon, Josh Jacobs, and Derrick Henry. There's just simply no example or historical precedence of a running back being that old and changing teams and then giving you the output needed to offset the risk of taking those running backs. So for me, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, all not that appealing in fantasy. Now, that brings us to our targets, the 5 running backs that I think can be the RB1 overall this year. I will say, of course, Christian McCaffrey, I'm not going to give you reasons on why to draft the 101 in fantasy football. He's a 101 for a reason. McCaffrey did it last year. I will say he is older, right, where he's no longer in year 4. He's in like year 8 at this point. He's 28, so he doesn't have the youth side of things in this exercise, but he just did it last year. Him and Jamal Charles are the only guys to not be 25 or younger and give you that legendary season. I'm not going to bet against Christian McCaffrey this season. So, our first running back here that we are officially willing to take over the early round wide receivers is Breece Hall. He is our first one. Now, don't worry, we're going to talk 5 running backs. We're going to get deeper into the other rounds. Of course, Breece Hall is still like a top 5 pick, but he checks every box. And like we saw on just the entire graphic here, he is by far and away the guy checking the most boxes. He checks every single box besides top 12 scoring offense, and even then we're talking about the 14th scoring offense. So he's 2 spots off. He is projected for all the volume in the world, 19.6 weighted opportunities per game. He has over 5+ targets per game in his projections. Last year he led all running backs in targets, receptions, receiving yards. He also has hit 2.5 or better FPOE per game, not only once in his last 2 seasons, but both seasons as a rookie, as a sophomore, despite ACL tears, despite Zach Wilson or a ACL tear, ankle injury, whatever. Still 2.5 or better FPOE per game in each of his last 2 seasons. He has RB7 and RB6 point per game finishes in those years, and he just feels like everything is coming together for this monster season. And that yellow category there of top 12 scoring offense, I think, outlines very well the downside of Breece Hall. Everything is there besides the environment around him. Can this offensive line hold up? We have Tyron Smith. We have Morgan Moses. You have Elijah Vera Tucker coming off an Achilles tear. I will say, though, their offensive line is so good that potentially first-round pick Olu Fashanu is coming off the bench, so that's a good thing. Then you have Aaron Rodgers, 40 years old, coming off an Achilles tear. If this can finish as a top 15-ish offense and just give you something that's not bottom 5 like it's been with Zach Wilson, we should have a legendary season potentially for Breece Hall. He is, at this point, the guy I'm drafting the most in the first round over on Underdog. You can see those are my exposures in the first round. Breece Hall, far and away my most drafted guy. To me, he is the poster boy for a legendary running back season this year. Now, the next running back we'll talk about, our second running back here, is Bijan Robinson. And he's really not that far behind Breece in terms of having a really good case for a legendary running back seasons. He is one of the best running back prospects ever, and he was stuck in an Arthur Smith offense last year that ranked 27th in offensive efficiency, bad quarterback play across the board. When we look towards this season, we have him checking pretty much every box. 18+ weighted opportunities per game in his projections, 5 or more targets per game in his projections. He's young. He's going to be on a better offense now with Kirk Cousins, Michael Penix, Zach Robinson at OC. Really, the only thing holding him back in this exercise is the previous high FPOE per game. Now, it is worth saying he's only had a 1-year sample. So last year he needed to hit that FPOE per game mark to get there, but I think we should give him some leeway as he is, again, only in his second year in the NFL. And I looked back at the 5 best seasons since 2010 for a second-year running back. So we expanded it out to Alvin Kamara and Le'Veon Bell. And Bijan Robinson's 0.3 FPOE per game was fine, but again, we're looking for that 2.5 plus. It was right in line with where McCaffrey was as a rookie. Le'Veon Bell was even more inefficient as a rookie, so it's really not that crazy for him to come out here and really bounce back from that. And to me, it actually looks a lot like McCaffrey's rookie year, where neither of them were very efficient, both hovering around 0 FPOE per game, but the targets per out run is really good. The yards per run, not great for Bijan, but again, his quarterback play was awful, so it's tough to be efficient there, but still commanding targets on a per out basis. Slot percentage is high, wide percentage is high. The reason we care about that is just because he's getting wide receiver type usage. It's not going to equal fantasy points necessarily, right? Like those reports in the offseason of, oh, this wide receiver or this running back is running routes as a wide receiver. Doesn't matter a ton, but at least tells us that he is a really good receiving threat if he's getting that kind of usage. Missed tackles forced per touch, better than McCaffrey's rookie year. And then OC change heading into year 2. You have Norv Turner, came to the Carolina Panthers in 2018. We now have Zach Robinson coming to the Atlanta Falcons this year. And what happened in year 2 for McCaffrey? He went from 14.3 points per game to 24.1. It wouldn't be that crazy for Bijan to do something similar. Now, we talk about that Zach Robinson OC change, and he is already bringing up McCaffrey as a comp for Bijan. He said Bijan's such a talented player, he's going to play running back first and foremost, and then any way we can find creative ways to get him the ball like the Niners do with McCaffrey is exactly right. So, we have it all. We have a guy heading into year 2. We have youth. We have volume. We have explosion. We have what should be a much better offense, and you even have something that Breece doesn't have. I guess Breece has a little bit in Tyrod Taylor, but Michael Penix is a much better backup where even if Kirk can't go because of the Achilles injury, it should be a much better offense, even if it's quarterbacked by Michael Penix than it was last season. And you also have Zach Robinson's background from LA, where that team has produced bell cows before in the past, like Todd Gurley, Kyron Williams, even Cam Akers for stretches before his Achilles tear. So we have a system that wants to use a bell cow, and Bijan Robinson is at the center of it. So moving on to the second round, our first running back here is Jahmyr Gibbs. And he is another guy that I think is worth targeting early because he has youth. He checks that box. He's in a high-scoring offense in Detroit, who is actually projected to be the second highest-scoring offense according to Vegas. They have a really good offensive line with Penei Sewell. You have a statue quarterback that's willing to check down in Jared Goff. And Jahmyr Gibbs would actually grade out a lot better if he hit that 5+ targets per game projection with Mike Clay. He hits 4.9. I was tempted to just bump him up and just give him 5, but I don't want to be untruthful. It's a very conservative projection, and here's why. First of all, Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the best receiving prospects ever at the running back position. He had 24 catches as a freshman, 36 as a sophomore, 44 as a junior for 104 total career receptions in college, which was more than McCaffrey, and it was more than Saquon Barkley, two other really, really strong receiving prospects at running back. Now, the interesting part is that he was actually inefficient as a receiver last year and was actually a really good runner between the tackles. He was thought as too slight, where he's like under 205 pounds, not a great between the tackles runner, but he was actually super efficient on his rushes between the tackles, where he was behind only McCaffrey and Kerrane on this list in terms of FPOE per game in the rushing game. Now, in terms of what this chart is, you have EP, that's expected points per game. FPOE is fantasy points over expected per game. But then you have that broken up just by rushing and receiving. So just rushing expected points, rushing FPOE, and then also receiving EP and receiving FPOE per game. And with Jahmyr Gibbs, he was RB6 behind just Kamara, McCaffrey, Breece, Eckler, and Bijan in receiving points per game and receiving expected points per game. But he had a minus 1.5 FPOE per game, which was super inefficient. That's pretty crazy. That should bounce back. We already saw the volume, and we already saw the efficiency with the rushing, where 2.8 rushing FPOE per game is really good. He gave you the explosive plays, so if he can take what he flashed in the running game, move that over to the receiving game as well, then we're talking about a guy that can hit that 2.5 plus FPOE per game very easily. He hit that alone in the rushing game. Imagine if he also hit 2+ in the receiving game, then we're talking like 4 or 5 FPOE per game, which isn't that crazy, just knowing how efficient he is, the explosive plays, how good he was between the tackles. The only thing that was missing last year is what was his calling card in college. Now, when we talk about projecting towards year 2, I just pulled up the running backs since 2010 with 70 or more targets in their second year. That's like roughly what you need for 5 or more targets per game. You need, I think, like in a 17-game season, you need more like 80. But all of these guys had 5 or more targets per game in their second year. And I just wanted to compare what Jahmyr Gibbs did in year 1 in terms of targets per game and targets per route run per game. And you can see he was pretty much right in line, where if we took the average across the board of these running backs in terms of what their year 1 output was and then what their year 2 was, Jahmyr Gibbs is right on line. His 21.2% targets per route run is right on line with the average of 22.2%. His targets per game was 4.7, actually above the average of 4. And then on average, we actually saw a 2.2 targets per game increase for these running backs. So that would kind of outline that it wouldn't be crazy for us to see him get to like 7+ targets in year 2 as like a very high-end range of outcomes, right? Where that's like Kamara, McCaffrey, David Johnson, and that would give you this massive ceiling. Now, again, I'm not saying I would project him for 7 or more targets per game. I am outlining his upside of how he wins leagues in 2024, and that would be his path to doing so. And based on his college profile, it wouldn't be that crazy. Now, you might say, well, Ron, he didn't get it last year. He was splitting the backfield with David Montgomery, but we have a running back heading into year 2, which really matters. This is a great article last year from Ryan Heath talking through age curves and cliffs for every position. And at running back, he found that on average, the league's best running backs experienced a 42% increase in production from year 1 to year 2. So we're going to see more volume and more production for Jahmyr Gibbs as he heads into his second season here. So I think that we could reasonably project for him to see more volume, to see more targets, tap into that receiving upside on a team that's going to score a ton of points. Everything is there for Jahmyr Gibbs, and I get that Montgomery is there, but that's already priced in. You don't have to pay the Bijan price. You don't have to pay the Breece price. He's actually going in the second round in ESPN leagues in terms of their ADP at this point. So it's all priced in. He was the RB8 last year in points per game despite the timeshare with David Montgomery. And if that's kind of the floor here, that almost kind of hacks the whole idea of legendary upside, because you have a decent receiving floor with him. Of course, injury is always there for running back, but he has the upside to be the RB1 overall. I know as crazy as that sounds, he's in the same backfield as Montgomery, but we saw Kamara do similar things with Mark Ingram early on in his career. I just don't think it would be crazy for him to have a Kamara-like season where we see 80+ catches. He doesn't even crack 1,000 rushing yards, and he just gets there on touchdowns and receptions to that 24+ point per game season. Now at RB4, this is a surprise ad. This was supposed to be Travis Etienne in the 3rd round. After doing this exercise, I will be honest with you guys, I cooled off a little bit on Travis Etienne, where he's there, he's between Kerrane and Pacheco, he's fine, but it's tough. Last year, everything went right, where Christian Kirk went down, and he still didn't have over 5 targets per game. I just think that he's probably capped out at like that 4 number. Like, I don't think that he can have that crazy reception season, and he's never flashed that super high-end upside through his first 2 years. That might come in year, it would be technically year 3, but really year 4, because his first year was a redshirt year where he had that injury. But the guy that I've actually moved up and have really come around on from this video, I'm actually going to definitely update my rankings for Kerrane Williams, who I actually think he's not somebody that I was drafting a ton of, but doing this video and doing this research, I've really come around on, where I've now changed my tune, because my biggest concern with Kerrane Williams was injury, really. It was injury and being a day 3 pick. We see all the time, like the Woody from Toy Story meme of these coaches just tossing aside day 3 picks. We saw it with Jordan Howard. We saw it with Alfred Morris. We saw it with James Robinson, where they just drafted Travis Etienne right after that. We saw even this offseason with Kerrane Williams, they draft Blake Corum, so it's like they're already telling us they don't value him much. He also has an injury issue, where his first year, he was on IR, missed the entire season with like a broken foot. Second year, ankle sprain, out for 4 weeks on IR, so it's just like he's already banged up, and then already in like spring minicamp, he already had a foot issue that he was held out with, so I was kind of just avoiding him, but I've done a little bit of a 180. All right, first up, we have Coach Speak Index, really good Twitter account, where he said Kerrane's good, pretty much on the Kerrane Williams foot injury. This was in May. Kerrane's good. He had a little foot injury that we're going to be smart with. He'll be ready to go for training camp, and then July 25th, he was ready to go for training camp. No issues. Also, Coach Speak Index, again, a really good account that just kind of like reads on all the GM, Coach Speak, everything kind of sifts through it. GM of the Rams said, Corum is so we don't totally run Kerrane Williams into the ground. This screams to me, this is Coach Speak talking, that Kerrane will still see a healthy workload. LA doesn't want to miss a beat when he needs some snaps off or misses games, so they drafted a similar RB in Corum to recreate Kerrane Williams in the aggregate with Kerrane Williams. I'm currently expecting something close to a 75-25 or 70-30 split, with Corum possibly siphoning some of the goal line work. If Kerrane misses time, Corum becomes an instant fantasy RB1 during that stretch. And I agree. To me, Blake Corum is a new age Alexander Mattison, but I think you can kind of treat this similar to Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison, where Alexander Mattison was never a threat to take away touches. He was just the must-own handcuff any week that Dalvin Cook went down. So I'm kind of buying into the idea that they're going to ride Kerrane. They now have a contingency plan if he goes down. And this is a running back in Kerrane Williams that when we look at this research here, he hit 2.9 FPOE per game last year. That is really, really good. He was a good running back last year. This is not your replacement level day 3 pick. You can look even further at yards created over expected per attempt. This is from David Zach on Twitter, where it takes into account your offensive line yards, your defensive stacked box percentage, yards before and after contact. It adjusts for literally everything. And to me, the list checks out, right? You have Devon Achane, I've been told now, Christian McCaffrey, Kerrane, James Conner, Jalen Warren, Khalil Herbert, Raheem Mostert, Gibbs, Breece Hall, Bijan. Like, to me, on a per attempt basis, those probably were like the top running backs last year. And then down at the bottom, Rashad White, Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce. To me, that checks out in terms of what happened last year. And Kerrane was 3rd in the league in that. He was also 7th in rushing yards over expected per attempt. He was really good. He was also the only other running back with 20 or more points per game. So he was genuinely talented. He wasn't just volume. Again, 2.9 FPOE per game is no joke. So he already flashed the upside to hit the massive FPOE per game ceiling we need for these legendary running backs. He already hit 20 or more points per game. And it was only his first year in a Sean McVay offense. And the reason why I'm bought in on him superseding what he did last year, or having the upside to do so, is the receiving game. You can see here he has green everything in terms of youth, offense, previous efficiency. The only thing he doesn't hit is weighted opportunities per game and targets. And if he had more targets, that would boost his weighted opportunities per game a lot, because again, it weights targets. And I think that he has a target ceiling that is a little bit untapped and unnoticed right now, where last year he was actually a really bad receiver. He had a 14.6 target per out run, which is fine, but a 0.64 yards per out run. That is awful. And then a 38.5 PFF receiving grade, also awful. But if we look back to his final season at Notre Dame, he had an 18.4% target per out run, a 1.47 yards per out run, and over an 80 PFF receiving grade. That was literally his calling card. He had an 89th percentile, 12.5% college target share over his entire career. So this is a guy that came in as a receiving back, right? Sub 200 pounds, and then he's coming out here and giving you a 38.5 PFF receiving grade. We have to remember, this is his first year in the NFL. It wouldn't shock me if in year 2 we saw them give him more receiving work. You also have no Aaron Donald, so the defense is going to be much worse this year. And it could just be a game of like they're behind late in games and they check down to Kerrane Williams and he's a better receiver than he was last year. It really wouldn't be all that crazy for him to see 5 or more targets per game, even in an offense with Puka, with Cooper Kupp. It's a very consolidated target tree. And I think that there is room for Kerrane to hit something much better than this 3.4 target per game projection. And last year we even saw Kerrane Williams had the 4th most targets in a season during the Sean McVay era, and we've seen him hit twice with Todd Gurley 5 or more targets per game. If Kerrane Williams is as good as Sean McVay thinks and is in that role, we could easily see 5 or more targets per game. And then we're talking about a guy that can improve upon what he did last year and give you 23, 24 plus points per game. So I've been Kerrane pilled. Anywhere at the 2-3 turn, I'm all in. Now I will say, truly the guy that I'm all in on, the guy who's on the thumbnail, De'Von Achane. He is, to me, the perfect legendary running back candidate. He is going in the 3rd round, right? So we talked about 2 first-round running backs, 2 second-round running backs. And to me, your draft strategy should hinge on De'Von Achane, where he is a round 3 pick on most sites. I would be stacking up wide receivers early, taking De'Von Achane in the 3rd round, and just rocking out with that, because this is, to me, the perfect legendary running back candidate, where if all we care about with early round running backs is upside, Achane has all of that. Now, when we look at the research from this video, we can actually see that crazily, De'Von Achane is 3rd on this list in weighted total, despite going as the RB7 off the board. He's actually ahead of McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs in terms of this legendary upside research that we did for this video, which is crazy. He has youth, right? He's under age 25. He's in his 2nd year, which we just saw from that Ryan Heath article. Going into year 2 is where we see massive strides for running backs. You also have already, he hit 6.7 last year FPOE per game in terms of fantasy points over expected. He's going to be in a good offense with Mike McDaniel. It's all there in front of him, where Mike McDaniel has had a top 6 offense and offensive efficiency over the last 2 years. And when we talk about FPOE per game, to me, it's one of the best signals of a running back having that massive upside. And De'Von Achane had 6.7 FPOE per game, which is the highest ever for a rookie running back. And of the rookie running backs, right, only 6 other running backs ever have hit 3 or more FPOE per game. That list is Jonathan Taylor, David Johnson, Kareem Hunt, Arian Foster, Zeke Elliott, Alvin Kamara. All of them hit 20 plus points per game in year 2. 2 of 6 of them hit 24 plus per game in year 2. That is why we're drafting De'Von Achane. He is somebody who breaks every efficiency chart that he's on. You can see here, this is rush yards over expected and EPA per rush. So that's just rush efficiency, rushing yards over expected. He is in a league of his own when it comes to anything efficiency-wise, which is what we want from these running backs. Now, his main competition here is Raheem Mostert. And I'm just not all that worried about Raheem Mostert. He is somebody where you can tell me what his outlier season is, where last year he, for the first time ever, not only finished as a top 24 running back, but as a top 12 and a top 5 running back. Before that, he had never even cracked the top 24 in points per game. Before last year, he never even had a 1,000-yard rushing yard season. And you can see 15 games played, 16 games played, but then 1, 8, 15, 6, 4, 1. He's someone who's been hurt his entire career. He is someone that has never had the kind of success he had last year. His 21 touchdowns should probably get dispersed to the rest of the backfield. And this could just be the passing of the torch to De'Von Achane. He's not going to hit your 18-plus weighted opportunities per game, but I just don't think that he has to. That's how efficient he is. And I think that he can get the targets here. It has him projected at 4.6, Mike Clay. I think we could see more than that, where this is somebody that caught passes in college. I believe he had 36 catches in his final season. And his year 2 breakout case is similar to Jahmyr Gibbs, where he's not going to get there on volume, but he is going to get there on the crazy upside. And he could just barely sniff 18 weighted opportunities per game if he got enough targets to get there. And when we plug him into the same thing we looked at for Jahmyr Gibbs, he actually had a 21.5% target per out run last year, which is just slightly off of what Jahmyr Gibbs had last year at 21.2%. It was actually more than Jahmyr Gibbs. 3.4 targets per game, but that actually wasn't that far off of guys like rookie year David Johnson, rookie year LaShawn McCoy, and those guys went on to have 6 and 7.5 targets per game in their second season. So we could see the receiving upside there. We have the crazy upside of the EPOE per game. So if we see 6 targets per game, crazy EPOE per game, he gets you touchdowns. He can also, like Gibbs, be your Kamara type of guy where he's not getting there on volume. He's just efficient. He's catching passes. He's scoring touchdowns. And what you have to fall back on is a guy who last year was the RB 32 in expected points per game and still finished inside the top 5 in points per game. Now, people love to point to, oh, well, one game he had like 50 points. Well, 2 of those games in his sample, he didn't play more than 10% of the snaps. Now, I get that injury is an issue. He didn't stay healthy all of last year. He got banged up. He's undersized. But again, all of these running backs early are risky. All of them have injury issues. Before the last 2 years of McCaffrey being good, he was injury prone, where he was getting banged up all the time. Jonathan Taylor was the new hot thing on the streets, and then the last 2 years, he's been injury prone and bust. So all of these running backs have a lot of risk in the first 3 rounds. I'm not going to be spooked off by that. He, to me, is the next Chris Johnson, Jamal Charles archetype of undersized running back, efficiency monster that just goes down as one of the best fantasy running backs ever. And I want exposure to that. I want to make sure that I have Devin Achane on as many teams as possible for fantasy as my 5th legendary running back in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It's one of my favorite videos to make every offseason. If you want my entire rankings, which kind of reflect these, where I have the running backs I don't think can finish as the RB1 overall buried in my rankings, I have the guys I think can finish as the RB1 overall pushed up in the second and first rounds as targets that you should be drafting. So if you want to go out there and make sure that you are prioritizing these guys with the high upside, not drafting the volume-based projections with high risk, you can go find my rankings over on patreon.com/Ron Stewart. I have my top 200 cheat sheet out right now, where if I needed one sheet to go into any home league draft, any high stakes, any ESPN sleeper draft, it would be this sheet where I have my targets outlined, my fades outlined, my target rounds for every player, like what round I want to draft these guys in. It's all tiered. It's a checklist that you can just download or print out for yourself. It's all on there, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. But if you can't support us over there, just leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm